It was Christmas Eve, the kind of evening that used to wrap the house in warmth. The ham was perfectly glazed, the mashed potatoes whipped just right, and the pecan pie, Harold's favorite, sat cooling on the kitchen counter beside an apple pie Ava used to help me slice apples for. The oak dining table, my mother's table, polished by years of holidays and heartbreak, was set for 10. Each plate resting on gold-trimmed chargers, each napkin folded with care. I stood at the far end of the table, carving the ham, my fingers moving with muscle memory as laughter floated in from the living room. My daughter Rachel was showing her boyfriend some travel photos. Ava, my 19-year-old granddaughter, was scrolling her phone, her face glowing from the screen. I was halfway through placing the ham slices when I heard her say it. "Old people shouldn't take up space." She laughed. A light, careless kind of laugh, as if it were some quirky observation. Her cousins chuckled too, some nervously. Rachel didn't flinch, didn't look up from her phone, just rolled her eyes like it was no big deal. I froze, ham knife hovering in midair. No one corrected her. No one said a word. So neither did I. Instead I smiled. The smile I'd learned to wear after 68 years of swallowing pain, so others wouldn't have to. The kind that says, "It's fine," even when it's not. I plated the rest of the meat, quietly placed it on the table, and sat in my chair. The same seat I'd occupied for over 30 years of holidays. None of them knew. Not Rachel. Not Ava. Not anyone seated at that glittering table. They didn't know that every gift under the tree, those iPads, those name-brand sneakers, the spa gift cards, the handbag Ava had hinted at for months, had come from me. They didn't know that I'd pulled over $35,000 from my retirement to help pay Ava's first-year tuition at NYU. They didn't know I had once held Rachel through a divorce that nearly broke her. Or that I watched Ava every night for years so Rachel could work 2 jobs. They didn't know because I never asked for credit. Never needed it until suddenly I did. Because in that moment, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in decades. The crushing weight of being uninvited in my own life. I didn't say a word that night. I smiled. I cut my food into neat little bites. I asked Ava how finals went, and she answered without looking up from her phone. I passed the gravy. I poured the wine. I complimented Rachel's boyfriend on his watch. I folded myself smaller and smaller until I could barely hear my own voice in the din. When the server, me always me, returned with dessert, I watched Ava snap a photo of her plate, post it with the caption, "Holiday feast. Thanks, Mom." And I just stood there, invisible under the glow of a tree I'd decorated alone. No one noticed when I excused myself. No one followed when I walked to the front hallway, pulled on my coat, and quietly stepped into the snow. The cold slapped my cheeks, but I didn't flinch. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and let my hands rest on the steering wheel. In my coat pocket, I felt the envelope I'd meant to give Ava after dinner. Check. Enough to cover her books and second semester housing. I pulled it out and stared at it under the streetlight. Then I tore it in two, clean and slow. The next morning, I didn't receive a call. Not from Rachel. Not from Ava. Not even a "Where'd you go, Grandma?" text. Just a message in our family group chat. Rachel. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. Everything was amazing." Ava. GIF of a dancing reindeer. That was it. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone, still wearing the red sweater I'd ironed that morning. The living room was pristine. The tree sparkled. The pies were untouched. Ava's seat still had a small white box tucked beneath the napkin. A silver charm bracelet, the kind with her initial on it. I'd found it in a boutique back in October and knew she'd love it. She never saw it. I didn't clean up. I poured a glass of wine and sat in silence, listening to Nat King Cole sing the Christmas song from my old stereo. The house was so quiet, I could hear the click of the thermostat switching on. And in that stillness it hit me. I was not part of the family. I was the furniture. The next day, I returned all the gifts. Every last one. The headphones. The coat. The new espresso machine Rachel had hinted at. The boutique bracelet. All of it. I brought the refunded money to the bank and closed the account labeled Ava's College Fund. The teller, a kind woman in her 50s, asked me, "Would you like to notify the beneficiary of the closure?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "They'll figure it out." For weeks, the silence persisted. Rachel didn't call. Ava didn't write. And the longer it lasted, the less it hurt. Instead, something surprising happened. I began to remember who I was. Not Rachel's mother. Not Ava's grandmother. But Elaine. A woman who once drove across 4 states alone to attend a teaching conference. A woman who loved fresh lilacs, handwritten letters, and jazz on Sunday mornings. A woman who dreamed of writing a memoir but never did. Because someone always needed something first. I pulled out an old notebook from my closet. On the first page I scribbled, "Who am I when no one's watching?" And underneath that I wrote, "I am a woman who survived widowhood and didn't lose herself. I am a woman who paid off her house on a single salary. I am a woman who stayed up until 3 a.m. sewing a Halloween costume when Ava wanted to be a flamingo." I stared at the list and felt something bloom. A small, quiet pride. A week later, I visited the local library where I'd volunteered before Rachel needed more help with Ava. The children's librarian, Marcy, lit up when she saw me. "Elaine, we were just talking about how much we missed your story hours." By the end of that day, I had agreed to return every Wednesday afternoon. It didn't end there. I reached out to a local community foundation and created the Harold and Elaine Bennett Legacy Fund, a small scholarship program for first-generation college students in the county. When the foundation manager asked what name to put on the plaque, I smiled and said, "Put mine this time. I've spent enough years in the background." They mailed me a thank you card. I kept it on the fridge. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for a call. I was just living. The rose bushes in the backyard began to bud in early April. I hadn't tended them in years, not really. But that week I did. I clipped the dead heads. I spread mulch. I knelt in the dirt with my old gardening gloves, the same ones Harold bought me for our 25th anniversary, and whispered to the roots, "We're still here." That spring I wasn't just pruning flowers. I was pruning my life. And the silence, it wasn't cold anymore. It was mine. The tulips came in early that year. By the second week of April, their red and yellow heads had pushed through the thawed earth behind the porch swing Harold had built for me when I turned 50. I'd been sitting out there most mornings with my coffee, wrapped in a light shawl, watching the neighborhood slowly bloom back to life. Felt different this year, not just the season but me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting on anyone. No calls. No invitations. No obligations I hadn't chosen myself. My calendar had volunteer shifts at the library, a writing workshop on Thursdays, and notes for the legacy fund I'd started. It was quiet, yes, but not empty. Rachel still hadn't called. Ava hadn't texted since Christmas. But I didn't replay it anymore. The ache had dulled into something manageable, like a scar that stings when it rains but no longer bleeds. I'd stopped checking the family group chat, stopped refreshing social media to see if I'd been tagged in a photo or remembered on someone's story. Instead, I filled a notebook. Its cover was a faded plum color with a small gold clasp that barely worked anymore. On the first page, in capital letters, I wrote, "The stories I've carried." It wasn't a memoir exactly, not the kind you publish or print for the public. It was more like a witness statement, a declaration to myself. I wrote about Rachel's first recital and how she had stage fright and clung to my skirt backstage. I wrote about Harold's last good day, when we danced in the kitchen to Nat King Cole with his 4-pole trailing behind him like a third partner. I wrote about Ava's birth and how her tiny fingers curled around mine like she already knew me. Every story had always lived inside me. I just hadn't realized how deeply buried they were beneath everyone else's needs. One evening, as I was rereading one of the entries, about a camping trip we took to Smoky Mountains when Rachel was 11, I realized something. I'd written 6 full pages. And not once had I mentioned feeling tired. Back then, I'd worked full-time, packed the car alone, cooked over a fire, swatted away mosquitoes, and slept on a mat that made my hips ache. But I never complained. As I was happy. That was the difference. Tired from love was different than tired from being overlooked. That same week I got a letter. A real one. Stamped and addressed in careful script to Elaine Bennett. No return address. I opened it on the porch, the afternoon sun warm against my shoulders. Inside was a folded sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind they sell in bulk at college bookstores. "Dear Grandma, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now. I wouldn't blame you if you tore this up before even reading it. But I wanted to say something without trying to explain everything all at once. I was cruel. I thought I was being clever or funny or maybe just part of the world I live in now, where everything is sarcastic and fast and filtered. But I see now that I wasn't just careless, I was unkind. The things I said about you, they haunt me. Not just because they hurt you, but because they revealed something I don't like about myself. I'm sorry. I hope you're well. And I hope when you're ready you'll let me try again. Love, Ava. I folded the letter slowly, placed it back in the envelope and set it beside my tea. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me, but because it did, deeply. But what I felt wasn't relief or forgiveness or hope. It was release. Ava had finally seen me. Not in the way I used to beg for, through guilt or gifts, but clearly, plainly, without noise. I didn't respond to the letter that day. I let it sit on the kitchen table for a while, beneath the vase of tulips. Instead, I wrote her a different kind of reply. That Friday at the library during story hour, a little girl with tight curls and blue glasses crawled into my lap while I was reading The Snowy Day. Her name was Imani. She kept tracing the illustrations with her finger, whispering the words I'd just said. After the reading, her mother came up to me and said, "You make her believe stories are magic." And I thought, maybe that's who I am now. Not just a mother. Not just a grandmother. But a storyteller. That weekend, I printed the application packet for the scholarship fund I'd helped create. The first recipient, a girl named Sophia, had written a personal essay about wanting to become a school librarian, because the woman who used to read to her at the shelter made books feel like home. I called the foundation director and said I wanted to start a second scholarship. This one named after me, the Elaine Bennett Quiet Light Award. For girls who move softly, but hold the world together, I told her. The next time I heard from Rachel was in early May. Another text. Short. Tentative. Ava's coming home for a week after finals. She'd like to see you. If you're open to that. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was angry, but because I'd stopped saying yes just to avoid silence. That afternoon, I drove to the nursery and bought 3 new rose bushes, blush, coral, and deep violet. I planted them myself in the garden Harold and I once tended side by side. By the time I replied, I simply said, "She can stop by Wednesday at 3. I'll be on the porch." I didn't bake cookies. I didn't dress up. I didn't rehearse what to say. When Ava arrived, she was alone. Her face was softer. Her clothes were simple. Her phone stayed in her bag. She walked up the porch steps and stood there for a moment before speaking. "You look well," she said. I smiled. "I am. Can I sit?" I nodded to the empty rocker beside me. We sat in silence for a while. Birds chirped in the trees. The roses swayed. She didn't apologize again. She didn't try to explain. Instead, she said, "I found one of your old storybooks at the library last week. The one you gave me when I was 7. It still had your note inside." I blinked. To my curious Ava, may your imagination never shrink to fit the world. "I didn't deserve that version of you," she whispered. I said gently, "you're starting to." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small paperback. It was a blank journal. "I thought maybe we could start writing something together," she said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just opened the book to the first page and handed her my pen. Ava didn't visit again right away. After that afternoon on the porch, after the journal and the quiet offering of something new, she texted me twice, once to say she made it back to campus, and once to share a photo of a coffee mug that said nevertheless she persisted. I responded with a thumbs up to the first and a heart to the second. That was enough. I didn't need to fill in the silences anymore. I wasn't trying to earn her affection with care packages or guilt-laced texts. I had finally stepped out of the audition. I was no longer asking to be chosen. I was simply being. And in being, I had found peace. May passed gently. The roses began to bloom thick and fragrant, filling the side yard with color and a sweetness I hadn't smelled in years. I spent my mornings tending the garden, and my afternoons at the library. Nora, the children's librarian, had started letting me lead the Friday read-aloud sessions. I began dressing up for them. A bright scarf here, a brooch there, just like I used to when Ava was little. You're their favorite, Nora said once after a group of third graders followed me out the door begging for one more story. I smiled. I think they just like my pirate voice. But I knew it wasn't just that. They saw me, listened, laughed, reached for my hand like it mattered. Children have a way of reminding you that presence is power, not performance. One Friday, while filing returns in the nonfiction aisle, I heard a voice behind me say, "Mrs. Bennett?" I turned. It was Sophia, the young woman who had received the first scholarship from the Walter Bennett Memorial Fund. She looked nervous, clutching a thin folder against her chest. "I didn't mean to bother you," she said quickly. "I just wanted to say thank you in person." I didn't know how else to. I stepped forward and hugged her before she finished. "You're not bothering me. You're honoring him." We sat at one of the reading tables and talked for almost an hour. She told me about her first semester, how overwhelming it was, how she nearly dropped out until she found a professor who reminded her of her grandmother. "She used to read to me when I was small," Sophia said, smiling. "Just like you." That evening, I opened my laptop and added another chapter to my memoir project. Chapter 7. The Women Who Stay Quiet Until They Don't. I had started writing the memoir under the title The Quiet Woman, but something about that phrase no longer fit. I wasn't quiet anymore, not in the way I used to be. I wasn't invisible either. I was choosing stillness now, not being forced into it. So I changed the title. Rooted. Stories from the woman they forgot to thank. Felt right. Every page felt like a reclaimed acre of land I'd once surrendered without knowing. And the more I wrote, the less I needed to be understood by people who had once overlooked me. I was writing not to be read, but to remember. Then June came, and with it the invitation. A cream-colored envelope, addressed in Rachel's neat looping cursive. "Elaine, we're planning a small celebration for Ava's 20th birthday. Nothing fancy, just dinner, cake, and a few close friends. She asked if you'd be willing to come. No pressure. We'd understand if you prefer not to. Love, Rachel." I read the letter twice, then set it on the kitchen table. I didn't feel anger or obligation. I felt the way a painter might feel when returning to a half-finished canvas years later. Not quite sure what the next stroke should be, but curious enough to try. I waited a day, then two. And on the third morning, I replied with a card of my own. I would be honored to attend. Thank you for thinking of me. Please tell Ava I'll bring lemon bars. I wore my pale blue blouse the day of the party, the one Harold always liked. I tied my hair back, added a touch of rose to my cheeks, and wore pearl earrings I hadn't touched since his funeral. I wasn't dressing to impress. I was dressing to honor the version of myself that deserved to be seen. Rachel answered the door with a tight, hopeful smile. "Mom," she said, "you look beautiful." I smiled back. "Thank you." The living room was filled with soft music, mismatched chairs, and the scent of vanilla candles. It felt casual, warm. Nothing like the sterile parties of years past where I'd sat quietly in corners while Ava entertained her glossy friends. Ava came around the corner wearing a green sundress and bare feet. Her hair was longer than I remembered, and her face softer. "Grandma," she said, smiling. "You came." I said I would. She stepped forward and hugged me. This time, it wasn't careful. It wasn't guilty. It was full. During dinner, I sat beside her. She asked about the roses. I asked about her writing class. She told me she'd started journaling again. Just for me. Not for class. And I told her that's how all the best writing starts. After cake, she stood up to thank everyone. Her friends clapped, Rachel beamed, and then she paused. "I just want to say," Ava began, looking at me, "thank you to the woman who taught me how to listen. Not just to stories but to people. And I'm sorry it took me too long to realize that." There was no applause. Just silence. The kind that holds truth gently in its palms. Later that evening, as guests began to leave, Rachel brought me a glass of water and sat beside me on the porch swing. "She's growing up," she said. "So am I," I replied. She reached for my hand and held it. "I know I haven't said it enough, but thank you, Mom, for everything. For holding all of us together." I looked at her, then out toward the darkening sky. "I'm not holding anymore," I said. But I'm still here. We sat quietly for a while, listening to the breeze, the sounds of a yard not quite asleep, the soft laughter from inside. And in that moment, I realized something. I hadn't come to be seen. I had come because I was already whole. I didn't expect things to change overnight. And to be honest, I didn't need them to. After Ava's birthday, the days returned to their usual rhythm. I watered the roses in the morning, went to the library on Wednesdays and Fridays, and continued working on my memoir in the afternoons. Sometimes in the kitchen with the smell of lemon bars in the oven, sometimes on the back porch where the hummingbirds came to visit. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no sweeping apologies, no sudden flood of daily calls. Just small shifts. A ripple here, a gesture there. Rachel began texting me every Sunday evening. Nothing long, just a picture of the casserole she made, or a line from a book she thought I'd like. One morning she dropped off a bag of fresh peaches with a note clipped to the handle. Thought of you when I saw these. Remember your summer cobbler? I did remember. I made it the next day. Ava sent a postcard from Seattle a few weeks later, where she'd taken a short trip with friends. The card showed a watercolor skyline and read simply, I miss your garden. I miss you. Love, Ava. I placed it on my refrigerator, just above a magnet shaped like a teacup. It wasn't the kind of mending I had once dreamed of. Not the tearful reunions, the full circle promises. But it was honest. Earned. And more importantly, it arrived without begging. I had learned the beauty of letting people come to you on their own. One Saturday in July, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Not for a birthday or holiday, but just because I felt like it. I made cucumber sandwiches, peach iced tea, and set out folding chairs under the old oak tree in the backyard. I invited a few friends from church, Nora from the library, and a woman I'd recently met at the co-op named Judith who'd also lost her husband years ago. I didn't invite Rachel or Ava. Not out of bitterness, but because this space was something new. And I was still learning how to keep it sacred. We talked about gardening, aging knees, books that made us cry. We laughed until our stomachs ached when Judith told us about her disastrous attempt to make sourdough bread. Later, as the sun dipped low and fireflies blinked in the hedge, I leaned back in my chair and realized something important. I wasn't lonely. Not anymore. I had created a life that didn't require anyone's permission to feel meaningful. I didn't need to be needed to matter. I had become my own anchor. That evening, I sat on the porch with a slice of leftover peach cobbler and opened my journal. July 15th. Peace is not the absence of people. It's the absence of needing to prove yourself to them. I closed the book and breathed in the evening air. The next morning, I received a voicemail from Ava. Her voice was soft, hesitant. Hi, Grandma. I hope you're having a good Sunday. I was just wondering if I could stop by sometime. No pressure. Just I miss you. And maybe I could bring you something from the market. She paused. Let me know. I love you. I played the message twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of malice, but because I didn't need to replay it to believe it was real. I texted her back a few hours later. Thursday morning. Come angry. She arrived just before 10. She brought flowers, wild, unarranged, clearly from the farmer's market, and a bag of croissants. I didn't know if you'd want sweet or savory, she said, holding them out like an offering. I'll take both. We sat in the kitchen with tea and buttered pastries, the old blue radio humming quietly in the background. She told me about her writing class. How her professor said her latest essay reminded him of Joan Didion. I smiled and said I had that book somewhere on the shelf. You were right, she said suddenly, brushing crumbs from her fingers. About writing being more than grades. It always is. She looked at me for a long moment. Do you think I've changed? I sipped my tea. I think you're learning to listen. That's the most important kind of change. Ava didn't cry. Neither did I. But something passed between us, soft like a bridge being built one quiet plank at a time. After she left, I stood in the garden, clipping roses for the table. I thought about how many years I had spent believing love was sacrifice. That being generous meant never asking for anything in return. That being a mother, or grandmother, meant giving and giving until there was nothing left of you to hold. But now I knew better. Love without respect is erosion. It wears you down, smooths your edges, until even you forget where you end and they begin. This new kind of love, the one rooted in truth, in space and presence, it didn't wear me down. It let me bloom. In early August, I finished the first draft of my memoir. I printed out the final pages, stacked them neatly on the dining table, and tied them with a piece of twine. I wasn't sure if anyone would ever read them, but it didn't matter. I had written myself back into my own life. I named the final chapter, "The Garden is Mine Now." It ended with this line: "Let them say I was quiet. Let them say I was kind. But also let them say, she remembered who she was before they forgot to ask." That Sunday at church, Ruth announced that the community library had nominated me for their annual Lifetime Literacy Advocate Award. I didn't even know such a thing existed. "There's going to be a small ceremony," she said, beaming, "and they want you to speak." I laughed. "Speak? Me?" She nodded. "You've earned every word of it." When the day arrived, I wore my favorite navy dress and a pearl pin shaped like a book. I stood at the podium in the town hall and looked out at the rows of faces, some familiar, some not. Rachel was there, sitting in the second row beside Ava. They both smiled as I began. I used to believe that silence was the same as peace, that staying quiet meant keeping love intact. But now I know. Silence can be a kind of forgetting. And peace is remembering who you are, even when no one else does. I paused, then continued. I spent many years as the background to other people's lives, giving without asking, loving without boundaries. I don't regret it, but I don't miss it either. There were tears in a few eyes. A soft hush filled the room. "If you've ever felt forgotten," I said, my voice steady, "if you've ever felt like your time has passed, I want you to know, it hasn't. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not invisible." I closed the speech with a quiet smile. "And if anyone tells you otherwise, plant a garden, bake a pie, write your story, and watch how beautifully the world remembers you." The applause was gentle, warm, the kind that wraps around you like a shawl. Afterward, Ava hugged me tight. "You're not just the reason I write," she whispered. "You're the reason I believe I can." And just like that, I knew I had already passed on something far more important than money or tradition. I had passed on truth. Autumn arrived quietly that year, slipping in under the late summer sun without ceremony. The air cooled just enough in the evenings to carry that crisp edge of change, the kind you feel more in your bones than your skin. I started sleeping with the windows cracked open, just to hear the leaves rustle and the crickets call. It reminded me of being young, when the world felt endless and my story hadn't been written yet. But now I knew. There are whole chapters we write late in life, some of the most important ones. I had spent the past few months reclaiming the space I had so willingly given up, not just in my home or my calendar but in my sense of self. I had made peace with the silence, turned down the volume on guilt, and traded old roles for new rhythms. And yet, as October settled in, a strange feeling began to stir. Not regret, not grief, quiet curiosity. It started one morning when I opened the cedar chest in the bedroom. It was something I hadn't done in years. Inside, there were old photo albums, my wedding dress wrapped in tissue, Walter's high school yearbook, and at the very bottom, a small wooden box I'd forgotten about entirely. When I opened it, I found dozens of letters. Some from Walter, some from friends long gone, some I'd written to myself and never mailed. One in particular caught my eye. It was dated March 1985, just after Rachel was born. I unfolded it slowly. My own handwriting stared back at me. "Dear future me, if you ever feel small or tired, or like you've been swallowed up by everyone else's needs, remember this. You are the woman who brought life into this world, who stayed up nursing a colicky baby through fevered nights, who packed diaper bags in the dark, and who still managed to be kind when no one said thank you. You are strong. You are allowed to want things. You are allowed to be more than what others need." I traced the words with my fingers, overwhelmed not with sadness, but with awe. Somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, I had the foresight to speak to a future version of myself. And now here I was, reading the words I once needed to hear, at just the right moment. Later that day, I took a walk through the old park near the elementary school. The trees were ablaze in reds and golds, and the wind tugged gently at my scarf. I passed the playground where I used to take Ava when she was little, and for a moment, I let myself remember the sound of her laughter, the way she used to run toward me with reckless joy. She was visiting more regularly now. Never expected, never planned, just quiet check-ins. A visit with soup, or a book recommendation tucked under my arm. She didn't talk much about the past, but she listened, and that, more than anything, made the difference. One Sunday afternoon, she brought over a copy of her latest essay. "Would you mind reading this?" she asked, sliding the pages across the table. "It's about legacy." I smiled. I'd be honored. The essay was honest and raw. In it, she wrote about forgetting what it meant to be loved without performance. About realizing that the people who show up quietly are often the ones holding everything together. She didn't name me outright. She didn't have to. At the bottom, she had written, "For the women W." I cried. Not the kind of tears that come from pain, but the kind that come when someone finally sees you, really sees you, after years of passing glances. That night, I lit a candle and wrote in my journal, "There are parts of us that bloom late. But when they do, they bloom with the strength of every season that came before." In November, Rachel invited me to Thanksgiving. "We'd love to have you," she said. Her voice didn't carry obligation, just sincerity. I hesitated. I had spent so long creating my own space, my own peace. I wasn't sure if I wanted to step back into theirs. "I'll think about it," I told her honestly. And I did. I thought about it as I raked the leaves in my yard, as I repotted my succulents, as I organized the pantry and pulled out Walter's old flannel blankets from the linen closet. And eventually I decided I would go, not to reclaim a place at the table, but to sit in it with new eyes. Thanksgiving morning was bright and cold. I wore a deep burgundy sweater and brought 2 pies, apple and pumpkin, both made from scratch. I also brought a small bouquet of garden rosemary wrapped in twine, because I had always believed that herbs carried memory. When I arrived, Rachel hugged me tightly. Ava lit up when she saw me, rushing to the door in thick socks and an oversized sweatshirt. "Grandma," she said, "I saved your seat." It wasn't the same seat I'd always taken. It was near the window beside Ava, far from the head of the table. But it was offered, and that made all the difference. Dinner was warm, loud, messy in the way families often are. But no one made jokes about age. No one dismissed my stories. Ava asked for my opinion on her latest class project. Rachel asked if I could help with the gravy. I was still quiet, but not erased. After dinner, while everyone napped or sipped coffee, I wandered into the living room and stood before the fireplace. On the mantel, nestled between framed photos, was something I hadn't expected to see. A copy of Ava's essay, printed and framed. Below the title was a note, dedicated to Elaine, who taught me how to matter. I stood there for a long time, not crying, just breathing, because I finally understood something I'd spent years trying to figure out. Sometimes you don't get the recognition when you want it. Sometimes, the people you love most forget how to love you back in a way that feels right. But if you hold your ground, if you find your voice, if you stop chasing what should be and start standing in what is, sometimes they come back. And sometimes they don't. But either way you do. You come back. To yourself. And in the end, that's the love that saves you. The last snowfall of the year came early that December. I woke up to a world blanketed in white, soft and unbroken. The garden looked like something out of a painting. Every branch touched with sugar, every petal tucked beneath its hush. I stood at the window with my mug of coffee, hands warm, heart steady. This year I had decided not to decorate for Christmas the way I always had. No 12-foot pine tree dragged through the living room. No wreaths on every door. No blinking lights outlining the porch. Just a simple garland of pine cones and dried orange slices strung across the mantel. One ceramic angel on the bookshelf. And a candle, white and unscented, always lit by sundown. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was chosen. That was the difference. I spent the days leading up to Christmas walking, writing, volunteering at the library's story hour, and preparing care packages for the shelter downtown, blankets, toiletries, new gloves. Things that didn't sparkle but meant something. I mailed Ava a hardcover copy of Little Women, one of my favorites, with a note inside. For the girl who reminded me I still have chapters left. On the 23rd, Rachel called. "We're doing Christmas brunch this year," she said. "Ava really wants you there." Her voice was hopeful, not demanding, and there was a softness I hadn't heard in years. I thought for a moment. "Thank you," I said. "But I think I'm going to stay home this year." A pause. "Are you sure?" "I am," I said. "But I'd love it if Ava visited later in the week, maybe just the two of us." Rachel didn't argue. She didn't guilt me. She just said, "Of course. We'd love that." I hung up the phone and felt no guilt, only certainty. That Christmas Eve I made myself dinner. A roast chicken with garlic and thyme. Roasted root vegetables. A small cranberry tart. I set the table for one, just one, and used the linen napkins I'd been saving for special occasions. Because I had finally realized, I am the special occasion. I poured a glass of wine, turned on the record player, and let Nat King Cole sing me into the evening. And I ate every bite with gratitude. Not for what I had been given by others, but for what I had given myself. After dinner I walked outside. The air was cold and clean, the stars above me clear. I stood in the center of the yard, arms folded, breath fogging the night, and I whispered softly, "I'm still here." Not pleading, not proving, just knowing. The day after Christmas, Ava came by. She brought a tin of shortbread cookies she had baked herself and a small notebook with a navy blue cover. "It's for your writing," she said, handing it to me. "Because I think the world needs more of your stories." I smiled, tears catching in the corners of my eyes. "That's very kind, sweetheart." We sat on the couch with tea and talked for hours, not about presents or plans or what I used to do for everyone, but about ideas, about books, about the letter her grandfather had left me, which she asked to read with reverence. "I never got to know him," she said, brushing her thumb over the folded paper. "But I feel like I do now." And in that moment something shifted between us. She didn't see me as a background character anymore. She saw me as a whole person. A woman with thoughts, history, heartbreak, and joy. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me tight. "I love you, Grandma," she said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say that in a way you could feel." And I replied, "I love you too, Ava. And I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming." The weeks passed. The snow melted. January gave way to February. I finished the first draft of my memoir. I called it The Table I Set for Myself. It wasn't a sweeping epic or a story of dramatic reinvention. It was a series of essays, reflections, quiet reckonings, stories about Walter, about raising Rachel, about the years I spent silencing myself in service of staying needed. And how? At 68 years old, I finally stopped apologizing for existing. I submitted it to a small local publisher on a whim. Nora from the library had encouraged me. "You have a voice," she'd said. "And people like you, we don't get published enough. But we should." I didn't expect much. But a few weeks later, I got an email that began, "Dear Ms. Whitaker, we'd be honored to share your words." I read the message 3 times before letting myself believe it. The day the book was released, I went to the local cafe with Nora and Ava. They had put a tiny display near the register. Just 5 copies. But there it was, my name on the cover. Elaine Whitaker. No titles attached.
No qualifiers.
Just me. A woman who had once believed her value was measured in casseroles and checkbooks. Who had once waited by the phone like a ghost in her own life. Now a woman whose story was bound and printed and sitting on a shelf. I signed a copy for Ava. Inside I wrote, "For the girl who helped me remember my name." The spring that followed was one of the gentlest I can remember. The roses bloomed early. The windows stayed open most days. I turned 70 that April. I didn't throw a party. I didn't expect balloons or a banner. But I did invite a few friends from the library, Ruth from church, and Ava, of course. We sat in the backyard under the oak tree, passing around lemon bars and laughing until the sky turned lavender. They gave me a journal and a bottle of wine. Ava gave me a card with just 5 words written inside. "You taught me how to stay." It was the best birthday I'd ever had. I no longer chase. I no longer beg. I no longer wait for someone to notice I've left the room. I set my table each evening, light a candle, and sit down with the version of myself I nearly lost, then slowly, steadily, brought back to life. Sometimes Rachel calls. Sometimes she doesn't. And I'm okay with that. Sometimes Maya sends me a message, a photo of a sunflower, or a clip of a poem she liked. And sometimes she doesn't. I'm okay with that too, because I know who I am now. I'm not just the woman who cooked every holiday. I'm not just the name on a check or a stocking on the mantle.
I'm Elaine Whittaker.
A woman who raised a daughter and a granddaughter. Who buried a husband and built a new life. Who learned, even in the quietest season of her life, to bloom again. And when I walk past the mirror in the hallway now, I no longer flinch. I see silver in my hair. Strength in my shoulders. Clarity in my eyes. I see a woman who came back to herself. And stayed. On the last page of my book, I wrote a line that I believe with my whole heart. Even if they forget your name, remember your own. And say it softly to yourself until it sounds like home again. And now, every morning as the kettle whistles and the morning light spills through the window, I do. Elaine, I whisper. And I smile. Because I am still here. And I always was. This story carries a message both tender and powerful. Your worth does not disappear simply because others fail to see it. For older adults who have spent decades in service to family, community, and tradition, it's easy to feel invisible once the spotlight moves elsewhere. But aging is not erasure. The love you gave, the sacrifices you made, and the wisdom you carry still matter deeply. When the world begins to shrink your presence to convenience or obligation, remember this. You are not here to be tolerated. You are here to be respected, to be valued, and above all, to be known. By others, yes, but most importantly by yourself. There is strength in silence, grace in boundaries, and healing in choosing yourself without guilt. Whether your family acknowledges your efforts or not, you can reclaim dignity, peace, and purpose. You have the right to set your own table, to speak your truth, and to walk away from places where your love is taken for granted. Aging isn't the end of your story. It's the chapter where you finally get to write it your way. And in that quiet, powerful choice lies the greatest freedom of all.